أهلا وسهلا فيكم. طبعا هذه ورشة العمل منظمة من ضمن فعاليات مشروع رومر اللي هو إدارة مخرجات البحث العلمي من خلال المستودعات البحثية مفتوحة الوصول لمؤسسات التعليم العالي الفلسطينية. جامعة خضوري شريكة في هذا المشروع مع كل من الجامعات الفلسطينية بير زيت، القدس المفتوحة، والجامعة الإسلامية في غزة. الجامعة الإسلامية في غزة هي الليدر لهذا المشروع، المنسق الرئيسي، هم اللي عملوا سبمشن ونحن شركاء معهم. شركائنا من الاتحاد الأوروبي في جامعة فيينا تكنيكال يونيفرسيتي، واللي حاضر من عندهم زميلنا أندرياس وجامعة كمان توماس من جامعة فيينا التقنية. كمان معنا من جامعة غلاسكو في بريطانيا جوي، وفي لنا كمان شريكين أوروبيين، جامعة بارما مش موجودين في هذا الورشة، وفي جامعة بريطانية أخرى اللي هي جامعة برايتون. هذول الشركاء في هذا المشروع. طبعا طبعا المستودعات البحثية في الجامعات الشريكة المختلفة في حقيقة تفاوت في وين موصلين فيها. جامعتنا راح تبدأ في هذا الأمر من الصفر. زملائنا في الاتحاد الأوروبي وشركائنا في الاتحاد الأوروبي هم موجودين معنا عشان يساعدونا كيف نبدأ في هذه الخطوات بشكل سليم بحيث أن تكون النتائج أفضل ما يمكن. I would like to welcome you all in Palestine Technical University. I would like to invite Dr. Rana Samara. Dr. Rana Samara is the Dean of Scientific Research and Graduate Studies at PTUK. She will have two talks, welcome speech to everybody, and then she will present the PTUK research perspective and things related to scientific research at PTUK. Welcome, Dr. Rana.
Good morning, everybody. On behalf of the President of Palestine Technical University, Khaduri, Professor Marwan Awartani, we welcome you all to this workshop. And we would like to welcome our guests from the EU, Joy, Andreas, and Thomas, and our colleague at Islamia University in Gaza, our university's colleagues from West Bank, from Bir Zayt, and from Al-Quds Open University. This project, I was involved in this project as the research scientific deanship, and I think this project is very important for research since it's gonna have a great impact on how we install our research finding and how can we present our university. Palestine Technical University was, as I was telling our colleagues from Europe, that it was established in 1930 as an agricultural school, and it has been shifted in between vocational training and educational institution until in 27 it was granted to be a state university. Since then, we have been able to start new faculties like Faculty of Engineering, Agricultural Sciences, Arts and Science, and Management. I would like to wish you all the best in this workshop, and hopefully it will be a fruitful and a successful endeavors. And again, welcome at Palestine Technical University. I hope that your stay will be as joyful as we wish it would be for all of you. Thank you very much. So I was told by Dr. Nael that it's good to have a little bit information about Palestine Technical University support for scientific research. First of all, the Deanship of Scientific Research and Graduate Studies have the aim of to develop and improve their infrastructure for research through having the suitable institutions and laboratory to establish scientific research. Then create the suitable research environment also by providing all the necessity and all the required instruments and consumables that a researcher needs for their achievements. Then promote cooperation between PTUK with local, regional, and international university through MOUs, through bridging. Now we are involved in the German Science Bridge and the Quebec Science Bridge that allow mobility between the academic staff and graduate and undergraduates to go and explore research either in Germany or in Quebec. Then strengthening the partnership with locally and globally institutions. Fund research proposal and student scholarships and grant by, it is not a big grant or not a huge fund, but it is a reasonable one to have a continuous and research at the university for the academic researchers. And then facilitate publication of research results and conference participation. By supporting these, we are trying to reach out for the global world through presenting our research in peer-reviewed journals and international conferences. The published scientific papers in the last 5 years have been growing up until we mostly have reaching 300 published papers in peer-reviewed journals. Mainly, these journals are published in well-recognized publication agency, just like in Germany, like in Netherlands, and in 20% in the USA, and in the I think something went wrong with this. This is in 20% in the USA, in the Netherlands, in the UK, and in international journals, and locally in Palestinian university that is published from Palestinian University. And most of these journals are registered at the Scopus or well-recognized data like Scopus, Thomson Reuters. The other thing that the deanships support is attendance international conferences, and the participation in international conferences is being growing up in the last 5 years. And we would like to show that this is our distribution. All our academic researchers have been going to attending conferences in North America, in Europe, North Africa, and in Asia and near Far East Asia. So we are distributing our knowledge, our research finding in international all over the world. And on the other hand, we are hosting local conferences, and we are inviting participation and keynote speakers from North America, Europe, and North Africa, and in Asia. So we are hosting, and we are distribution. We are trying to go to the global with our research finding. Another thing that the deanships are hosting is annual reward for distinguished scientific research by supporting a simplified gift or awards for people who have published their work, and it has been cited for more than 10 times in the last couple of years. And at the same time, distinguished researchers who have published their research in an impacted or indexed journals, and it was recognized by the global institution. Also, we are starting to fund some of the research proposal locally for academic researcher who applied for a short term with a small budget research proposal. And in last year we have 3 for agricultural research and 1 for the science research. The other part of our deanship is to manage master program. We have only one master program, which is agriculture biotechnology. The enrollment is also increasing. Now we have almost like 30 students enrolled in the master program, and from these 60 project was funded from international and national funds that support their research and support their finding through the 2 years program. Lastly, our university also have established a Palestine Technical University research journal that is also well known locally, and we are working on to make it an index journal by going to the globe with our knowledge and our research. These journals are managed by an editorial board from Palestine Technical University and other university to publish local researches related to Palestinian findings. And with this, I thank you all for your attention.
So my name is Joy Davidson. I'm from the University of Glasgow, and we're a core partner in the Romor project. This is the second in, I think, 3 workshops that we've got planned. So this is the sort of intermediate phase of the workshop. At the first workshop in Parma, we had all of the participants, each of the 4 partner institutions from Palestine, start to think about the business and sustainability of the research infrastructure and the open access repositories that you're working to develop. And I mean, it sounds like you already have some very good infrastructure here to build upon, so it's nice to see. Having these things requires time and money, and somebody has to want to see these services sustained. So what we want to see each of the partners to do is to develop a business plan. So something that you can take to your senior management who may have other ideas about where to spend the money, and to try and get them to see the value in investing and having this kind of infrastructure. So the business canvas model is essentially a visual representation of a business plan. It gets you starting to think about all the various things you need to put into your plan, and it's a collaborative tool. It helps you to think in a group, what sort of infrastructure do we have, what sort of value propositions are we offering to the people who use the services, whether it's the researchers, whether it might be the administrative staff who want statistics on, you know, how many papers are coming out each year, how many grants do we have, how many conferences are we attending, and where are we going. So you can start to see that there's lots of different people who might benefit from having this information in an easy-to-get way, and can reuse it when they need to get it. So people were sent away after the workshop in September to start to think about developing their own business model canvas. This is what it looks like on the screen. You can start to see it's just a very high level visual approach. So we'll let Niall maybe go through it, and you can share it, and you'll probably pick up what it's all about. But essentially, this is the first step in a business model, business plan. It won't be the end. It just leads you into thinking about how to take it further. So after we hear this presentation, we'll have some discussion about the approach taken so far.
Okay, thank you, Joy. Thank you very much. Of course, as Joy explained, what is a business model canvas. In fact, every university which is a partner in this project prepared its business model canvas, and this is ours. We started working on it while we were in the training workshop in Parma, and we finalized that after coming back home with discussions with our stakeholders at the university, library, scientific research deanship, academic vice president. All these people were involved in this, and also the computer center. Welcome, Dr. Adnan. Hope that you find the way easily. Okay, let's start with the, can you see, or should I make the font larger?
I think you should.
Let's start with the value propositions. First point is provide open access to trusted researchers. Of course, in fact, this is, I think, common to everybody. The aim of open access repositories is to enable open access to research data to all interested people. Provide safe and secure infrastructure for research data management. Improve research cooperation. In fact, Dr. Rana also talked about these things. The points that we have here mainly inspired from our discussions with the Deanship of Scientific Research, Library, and Vice President for Academic Affairs. Library and researchers can easily deposit research data. Promote teamwork activities. Okay, provide international recognition of the university. Effective marketing tool to the university, knowledge pool to the students and industry, networking, local and global, enabling network local and global, provide support for long-term strategic planning, increase revenues. Okay, how to move to next page, because there is something down in the next page, this one. Promote the linkage of scientific research with community needs, and opens job opportunities, opening job opportunities for people, for example, who are going to manage and who are going to provide technical support to these things and to take care about depositing the research data, outputs, etc. Improve research impact. These are our propositions, value propositions. Okay, our customer segments, academic staff interested in scientific research at PTUK and also other universities, policymakers at universities, students, PSC and MSc students, editorial boards, Ministry of Higher Education, research sponsors including industry, NGOs and other institutions, deanship of scientific research and graduate studies, faculties, academic faculties and faculty deans, e-learning center. I'm sorry. Okay, this finger. Yellow button. Okay. E-learning computers in library, and ACAC also is a customer and partner in this issue. I'm sorry. Okay. Key partners, Ministry of Higher Education and ACAC, University Administration, donors and private sector, Romor, our Romor partners, national and international partners, ICT Center at PTUK, Library, E-Learning Center, Multimedia Resources Center. In fact, it is the center where we are having the workshop right now, and it is head by Mrs. Mace. Deanship of Scientific Research and researchers at our university. The key activities, some of these activities, of course, we have already finished them and we are done with them. Identification of working teams, the needs assessment, and which is already finished. Look at other universities' experiences, and we have learned from the experience of other our partners in this project. Birzeit, Al Qurtuba University have already experienced the repository work before. Training sessions. We already had one training session in Parma, the first training session, and now this is the intermediate, and we will have a third training session in Vienna in next May, coming May. Setting up the repository hardware and software, a step that we are working on these days, and our colleagues from the computer center have already started working on that. Define and review policies. This is the coming homework of that we are going to work on maybe within the coming few weeks. The dissemination, how to spread the idea of the. Okay, depositing research data into the repository. This activity, I think, is something that we are expecting to start with within 2-3 months from now, hopefully. Arrange meetings and workshops with researchers inside PTUK, and preparing metadata, improve awareness about open access publishing. Key resources, hardware and software for data storage and networks. Human resources, mainly human resources are in the computer center and in the library. We have also from the library, the e-library head, who is working with us consistently. We have the software developers from the computer center, network administration also from the computer center at PTUK, our colleagues from the European Union, and financial allocation. We have some fund from the project itself to have the hardware and the networking facilities, and then the university allocates some fund to promote and support scientific research. And we hope, as we talked, we had a meeting with the Minister of Higher Education before, and we talked with him about that, and he was very encouraged with the project idea, and I think there will be a link between the fund that the ministry allocates for scientific research to all universities and this project objectives. Training materials. Okay. The channels, communication channels, we have the brochures and printed material. Okay, emails, university human resources system again, training workshops, university website, interviews with administrative units, and the social media. Okay, I hope I talked about everything. Yes. Okay, that is our business model canvas at P2UK. If you have any questions, and I think after this we will have a discussion with Joy, Andy, and Thomas about that. Thank you very much.
I think we've all been really impressed, actually, by what you guys have done. I think each of the partners so far has surpassed expectations on doing this. We've used this activity in European projects as well, and quite often it's not to the same level of completeness as what you've done here. I think there are a couple of key points that I thought, that really struck me as excellent things to see in there. I think from your value proposition, I'll maybe run through some things and then I'll pass over to Andy and Thomas. What I really liked about your value proposition was the fact that you had highlighted there that you want the researchers to have somewhere to put their stuff easily.
Yes.
That is so crucial to all of these services. You can come up with the best system, but if people don't like the interface or they can't use it and they can't figure it out, it's useless. So I think to really put that up as a key thing, that you want something that's simple to use, that people can like to use it, that's excellent. So that's something I like to see there. I also liked on your value proposition that you had the links to industry, and using this infrastructure as a way of improving the visibility of the research within the institution to industry, because I think for sustainability, that's definitely a key active area to pursue. This is something that we struggle with a little bit in the European side, and I think maybe you have a better track record at working with industrial partners perhaps than we do. So I think there's maybe some lessons that we can learn from you, but definitely I think that is something that is good to see in the value proposition. It shouldn't just be that the value is recognized by the people within the university. You do want to see that it has that broader value, and the infrastructure can help you to make those links outside as well. I think we also heard from the introduction that you gave, there's lots of interest in trying to get your research out to conferences and to bring conferences back. Again, I think that was nice to see in your value proposition that having this one-stop shop, making it visible, is a great way of trying to get people to see what it is you have and to put that out there. So it's not always possible to get to the conferences, but by having your stuff online, you can still meet those targets and try to drive up the international reputation. So that's really great. And I did like the fact that you linked in as well the sort of notion of public benefit. It's not just for the researchers, it's not just for industry, it's for society. Again, this is a key objective for the European Commission and Horizon 2020. People don't like to see research for research's sake. They want to see that this is making a difference to people's lives. So it's good to have that in your value proposition, because again, you're showing that this isn't just researchers getting to sit and do things that they're finding interesting. It is actually making a difference. So it's good to have that in there. Moving on to some of the things in the relationship side that I thought were worth picking up. I like the fact that you had a good mix of sort of face-to-face discussions with people, because to be honest, that is the best way to get people to understand what the service is, what it can offer them, and how they can start to engage with it. It takes time and money. That's always the sort of tricky part, is you could spend all day, every day going out and talking to students and different faculty members and getting them to think about what you can offer. So I thought it was good to balance that out with things like the emails and the surveys and all of this kind of stuff. I did also want to pick up on the survey aspect. I think that's excellent. One of the things you don't want to do, we did a little bit of a needs assessment in the first stage of the project, so it's been about a year since we actually went out and spoke to people in the institutions to figure out what they were doing, where they felt that they had requirements around research infrastructure and what they wanted. It might be time to start going back out and just seeing, have things changed? You know, you can't just do this once, so I like to see that you have this in there, that you will be doing this as part of the value proposition, making sure that as we develop these services and support and the technical infrastructure, that they are meeting the needs and that people are happy to use it, because it's very, if you lose somebody early on, it's very unlikely that you'll get them back. So I think that that's excellent to see that you've built that into the relationship side of things. One of the things I thought maybe could go into the relationship side was something more targeted to the senior management. Again, because you've got lots of good value propositions that they would definitely like to see. So it's maybe thinking how you get that relationship out. And I think we heard from your introduction as well that there's annual statistics and you've got nice awards for the researchers in terms of citations. That kind of stuff could be pulled from the system and fed back to the senior management. Again, just to show, you know, this investment is paying dividends. So that could be maybe something to add in there. In terms of, let's see, I'll skip through. I think I won't go through every section. I'll leave some time for my colleagues to add in here. Going to the activities side, I'll pick up a couple of things here. I thought it was really nice to see the mix of the activities to get the hardware and software in place. That's, you know, obviously a key objective for a lot of the project, is to get these things set up, get them tested, get them working. But equally, and I like to see it in your list there, you've got a lot of that softer side of the infrastructure. And I think this is something that we've seen in every partner's plans, which is great, is that you're not just looking to get the technical infrastructure up. You're spending a lot of time and effort thinking about the policies, how you're going to govern the use of these tools, because that really is going to be crucial in making sure you know who gets to use it, what they can put in there, what you're committing to keeping as an organization. So the policies really are important. But equally the training, I like to see that coming through several times in different places. That's really good to see, because unless the people that you're targeting to use the stuff know where it is and when they should use it, again, is pointless. So it's good to see that that's come up several times in the Canvas. I also thought it was quite nice to see in your activities, you've got a real nice focus on the metadata. And again, I think for the visibility of the research outputs, good metadata is going to be important. So it's nice to see that that has been pulled out as an activity in its own right and not just bundled up with some of the other activities. One of the things I did want to pick up on your resources, moving on to that section. Again, I think you've done an excellent job at really balancing all the different operational units. One of the key things that we've been stressing throughout the project is research data management is not one person's job. It's the researchers, it's the librarians, it's ICT, it's the ethics teams. You know, there's no kind of one unit that's going to be able to do this single-handedly. So it was nice to see that you have a good representation. And again, I think we've seen that from all of the partners, that they're really starting to think, how will we deliver this service collaboratively rather than one, you know, operational unit taking ownership, because that generally doesn't tend to work when you've got just the library or just ICT driving it. So it's good to see that you've got a good mix there. One of the other things I thought was really nice to see in your Canvas was the fact that you've included your Romor peers as a key resource. And that's definitely, it's not just the Romor funding, it's also the people. And I think that's definitely a really good asset to pick up, because it's the EU partners, but also your peers that are going through the same thing at the same time. So we're learning a lot from each other, and I think that is definitely a key resource. Another last thing for me on the resource side was I thought it was nice to see that you picked up on the interest of the ministry, because that is a resource. I mean, to have that, it's definitely, it's good to have if you've already, and we were quite impressed by how much interest the project teams based across the different institutions have been able to engage with the ministry. And I think, again, sometimes more effectively than we can do it back home. You seem to have a much closer relationship with the people in your ministries, and you've got their ear, which is, you know, a really important thing. So that is a key resource, and I think when you're coming back to the channels, and this is something that I think would benefit from the collaboration, not just one institution, but all of the peers, is thinking how do we make that case to the ministry a little bit more a joined plea for support and sustainability. So I think it was nice to see that this has been picked up by everybody as well. I think that's probably everything I had, the key things I wanted to talk about, but definitely I think it's an excellent start and lots to work with as you're going into the next stage. So I'll pass over to Andy.
You covered everything. Something maybe is that I noticed is it's an extremely comprehensive canvas. So you've addressed a lot of different lines, you know, the red trajectories that we were discussing yesterday. A lot of different systems, a lot of different services that all lead to a lot of different value propositions. So I guess the art will be really for us also for the remainder of this project to prioritize and see where we focus on, because all of that is necessary, essential and helpful. What are the key things to start with? What are the immediate benefits that we want to reap? And this, I guess, points also to the exercise that we did yesterday and probably will also repeat today, is, you know, setting the milestones and the next activities and deciding where to focus on first. And this, I guess, also leads to a short comment on the value propositions. While seeing the strategic importance, I love things to be seen driven bottom up, because it's people who are doing it in the end. So what I usually find very helpful, if it's concrete benefits to individual staff members, roles, functions, and the more concrete they are, the easier it is to get the buy-in and the support and the willingness to invest time into it. So something like, you know, international networking and visibility are obviously nice strategic goals overall, and we all want to achieve them. But how can we measure whether we were successful in achieving that? So what are the concrete things that we want to reach? What is the value proposition? So the example that you gave in your introduction, when you had those charts, where are people going to? From where do we have people coming in? And we have a central place where we can find out who has those contacts. That's a value proposition. Because if I want to go somewhere, or if I want to know whether somebody is coming in, I can go someplace and find out about that easily, rather than needing to know 5 people who know somebody who has been there. Okay? So that's a concrete value proposition. If I want to go someplace, or if I want to send a student to some university, do we have anybody in our university who has already been there? That's a simple service, concrete value proposition, and that is then showing the networking, that's then showing the visibility as overarching goals. So sometimes I find it very helpful to break it down to sometimes seemingly trivial little services, but that overall are helpful and show the immediate benefit to different roles then. And so I guess that's also helping us then to focus on what would be the services that we want to implement first. So you had job openings as part of the value proposition. If that is an urgent, pressing need, we need to attract more staff members. We are competing for the best staff members. Then we need to provide some service that shows that to a national, international community. So seeing what the priorities are in order to see where we focus. And what I also liked in the customer relationship section is that you had not only the generic means of channels in there, like we all use emails, we all use social media channels, but also concrete systems that one can link up to. So you had the human resource systems in there, you had the open access repository, open access management system in there. Those are then the concrete systems that then we need to, in the activities, to integrate in order to offer a certain value proposition. So I guess that will also be part of the exercise now to see, okay, prioritize the value propositions that we want to offer, and then finding out which activities and via which combinations of challenges channels, both on the technical level as well as on the training, workshop, dissemination channels. We need to combine to deliver one specific, two specific, three specific value propositions. And I guess this will be the key challenge, because this one is very, very comprehensive. And I guess this can be a guiding document, so to speak, for the next years to come and to evolve. As a very, very solid basis. But now I'll hand over to you actually for questions or for issues that you would like to discuss with respect to this.
Yesterday, and I would like to pick up on this, making the things specific, because in the value proposition you have, for example, 3 times mentioned something about cooperation and teamwork. These are basically synonyms, and you can group them under one point and just make the list a bit shorter. The other thing is the coupling between the sections. So if you are listing things in, for example, customer relationships, you said that you're going to have a help desk. Do you have anything in the activities that is referring to the help desk? So the activity would be running the help desk, hiring staff to run the help desk, and in the costs, you would have to mention the cost of running the help desk. So I think that you should maybe look at the canvas and see whether you are able to tell a coherent story for all of the points to connect them. Because you have a very nice listing for each of the section, but I'm not sure about the story flow for each of these and the priorities. And the last thing I have is for the key activities. A very nice thing that you had for setting up the repository systems. This is a very specific thing that you described. But you have a generic point, which is planning. Planning of what? No, it's maybe planning for policy introduction. If we are going to discuss about the policies, so maybe listing specific activities that you have to perform would help you focus in telling the story, how it all connects to each other. And apart from that, great work, because I have very long list of things for each of the sections.
Thank you very much.
So now I'm handing over to you. Any questions, comments from the audience about the business model canvas? So in this session I want to talk with you about policies, understanding policy development. I want to show you a document, a model policy developed by a LEARN project. You will find it in your files, so you can look for this document, because this will be the focus of this session basically. In the first 20 minutes, 15 minutes, I will explain briefly where this document comes from, the project that produced it, how was this created, and then I will just give some explanation of terminology we use for policy development, and then we'll have a short exercise in which we will discuss some parts of this document. This document should in general help you develop a policy for the PT UK. So this policy was developed within a Horizon 2020 project. It's based on analysis of policies available in German countries, German-speaking countries, also from Great Britain. You can tailor this model policy to your institution. As you can see, there are some blank spaces like the name of research institution. So you have to fill it out. You have to take the logo out, put the logo of your own institution, customize it the way you want it. That was the idea of the project, to provide some text that people can copy, paste, and reuse, because there is no need for each institution to write their own policy. We can base on what others have produced. We are doing the same exercise in Austria currently. We have a project called Research Infrastructures Austria, where we have medical universities, technical universities working together to adapt a policy. Each of us will have very likely a different phrasing of this policy, but all of us started from this document, making changes, adding text, removing text from the policy when needed. Same thing happens right now also in Italy, where our friend Paolo Budoloni was involved in this project, and he has contacted many universities in Italy. They are also discussing having this policy template at their universities. Apart from this text of the policy, there is also some guidance. I think you have 2 printouts from the LEARN project in your files. One is the policy, the other one is the toolkit. So it provides some explanations of the fields of the policy. There are also some more examples available within the toolkit. Here is the link, so you can later check it up, what they produce that helps you customize and build your own policy. Good. Now, this was the introduction about the policy template, and I would like to explain a few differences in semantics, in wording that we use to describe things, and this will help us understand what a policy actually is. In the next 5 slides, I will show you examples of taboos, principles, policies, and rules and legislations, and then I will make a short summary of how it differs. A taboo is something which is forbidden or disapproved of or placed under a social prohibition. So an example is, you should not delete scientific data, you should not destroy infrastructures. It's usually a very short explanation of something in a negative form. This is taken, this is the Old English, and it resembles the 10 Commandments, for example, from the Bible. But you also have some similar formulations, I think, also in Quran, that you should not do something, and usually you have just very few taboos that everyone agrees that something is bad. In this case, deleting scientific data is a bad thing. If you have principles, is a different way of putting the same in a positive way. And principle is a fundamental truth or proposition that serves as the foundation for a system of belief. So in this case, we have research data are to be preserved, research data are to be kept fair, research data infrastructure are to be kept accessible. So putting a taboo in a positive way as a general rule. Instead of forbidding doing something, providing a rule for doing something in a positive way. A policy is a combination of rules. It expresses a view of a certain institution on some topic, on some specific topic. In this case, when you talk about policies for data management, the policy will explain the principles defined for data management. An example is the institution PTUK will preserve its research data. Will preserve its research data infrastructure always accessible and free to its members according to the FAIR principles. So you can see that we combined 2 principles from the previous slide from the example into text of a policy. So this is a quite high-level thing, a quite high-level principle. It doesn't say exactly who and what is doing, but it expresses the statement of a university. Usually when you introduce a policy, you don't modify it every second day. You have to introduce it, let's say, in 2 years, the policy will become active. People will have to follow a policy, and then it will be valid for the next 5 years. It will be revised maybe after the 5 years, but you need to give people time to adapt to it. Usually at the beginning, people will be skeptical, but at some point they will follow. Of course, if you're doing something terribly wrong, maybe you have to change it quicker, but it has to be stable to take effect. The last thing are the rules. They are specific. This is like a breaking down principles into rules. You can have many rules. They prescribe concrete actions. So example that law is an expression of rules. Here you can see how we modified our principles. Our university will maintain accessible our infrastructure each day from 9 a.m. to 12 a.m. and offer support only on Friday from 7 a.m. to 8 a.m. The research data that are publicly funded are to be kept free and accessible to all members of our university each Sunday from 9 to 12 a.m. So we had a principle, a commitment from a university saying we want to make data accessible, and this is something that is fixed. And the rule is expressing this principle. It's just like an implementation, how we should understand the policy, how we should follow the policy. If this doesn't make sense to people, you can change it. You can say, okay, we also will keep it, open on Sundays because it's not open on Sundays. But you don't modify the policy. The policy says we want to make data accessible. And specific implementation of the policy is expressed by specific rules, that you have many rules and the rules can be changed. Policy should be stable for at least some time. And here, just to sum up, you can see the taboos, principles, policies, and rules. So we started with saying that we should not be deleting scientific data. The principle expresses what we should make the data infrastructure is accessible. Policy is saying that the data should be accessible and that it should be fair and there should be infrastructure. And specific rule define when and how this can happen. And today we are going to talk about the policies. So a commitment from the university and the statement and the view of the policy on data management. Good. Let's go to the document. The document, as you might have seen already, has 6 sections. The first section is the preamble. It's like an introduction to the policy document. It expresses the opinion of the university on data management. The second section, jurisdiction, describes which other regulations apply to data management. Usually the policy should be the single document describing what you should do with the data management, but it can happen that there are some regulations from funders, or maybe there are some regulations from an ethical committee about handling sensitive research data. So this section describes which document is more important, less important, which should be interpreted in the first place, which in the second place. Then you have the information about IP and intellectual property rights. We will look at the example of the text and we'll discuss this point. Handling research data describes general actions that everyone at the university is supposed to take. So, for example, it says that you should keep your data for 10 years. Not 5 years, not 15 years, but at least 10 years. It should say that if you're doing your research, you should keep your data in a central repository offered by your university, or it can say you can keep your data wherever you want. So this describes general principles of how you should handle data. And then we get to the responsibilities. So this section defines what are the responsibilities of researchers and of the institution. So if we define in handling research data that you should keep data for 10 years, the responsibility of a researcher would be to keep the data in the infrastructure during the research, not delete the data, but the responsibility of the university would be to provide this infrastructure. So section number 4 is very much connected to section number 5. Section number 4 describes the principles that have to be followed, and 5 describes the duties of each stakeholder within the process. Because this is the good data management is not a responsibility of a single entity, not a single stakeholder, but it's a cooperation of researchers, digital libraries, infrastructure providers, management, and so on. And the last point is the validity. So validity says basically from when this policy becomes, from when people have to follow the policy and for how long the policy is valid. I will now go with you through the first 3 points, just through the text, to show you how to interpret the document. And then I will ask you to do one small exercise. So to adapt this text, you would have to do the following. The name of the institution you have to replace with the PTUK, so it would read like, the PTUK recognizes the fundamental importance of research data. And you have a footnote to research data. Here is a footnote to research data. And it tells you, see definitions of research, researchers, and research data in the annex. If we jump to the annex, which is almost at the end of the document, here you have the annex. You can see the definition of research, research data, and researchers. This is very important to define what you mean by research data. Do you mean only publications? Do you mean also slides and presentations? Do you mean underlying data that you captured during analysis? Does it mean that this is only the data that is connected to the publication or all the data within the project? So already in the first sentence of the policy, you have a challenge to resolve. If you keep reading further, so the PTUK recognizes the fundamental importance of research data and the management of related administrative records in maintaining quality research and scientific integrity, and is committed to pursuing the highest standards. This is usually okay. The PTUK acknowledges that correct and easily retrievable research data are the foundation of an integral to every research are the foundation and are integral to every research project. I think this is what the university would also agree. They are necessary for the verification and defense of research processes and results. RDM policies are highly valuable to the current and future researchers. Research data have a long-term value for research and academia with the potential for widespread use in society. So this is a very high-level commitment from the university. The main problem here in this paragraph is to agree what research data means to your institution. If we go down and if we jump to the section 3, intellectual property rights, you can see that it doesn't really mean that you have to specify which licenses to use. So if we read it, intellectual property rights, IPR, are defined in the work contracts between a researcher and his or her employer. IPRs might also be defined through funder agreements, for example, grant or consortial agreements. So it means that the intellectual property rights come from the contract you signed when you got your job. You signed the contract with your university, and some section of the contract says if the IPR belongs to you or to the university. So you would have to clarify this. The other thing is if you are getting an external money for your research, very likely in the consortial agreement between you and the funding body, there is also a section about IPR. So the policy here doesn't prescribe any specific IPR rights, but tells you refer to your contract, refer to the funder agreement. In cases where the IPR belongs to the institution that employs the researcher, the institution has the right to choose how to publish and share the data. So in case in your working contract it says that whatever code, whatever data you collect, it belongs to the PTUK can say this data has to be put into the repository. And you as the researcher cannot say, no, I'm not doing that. You are employed by this university. The policy says that the rights of the university are more important than your own rights. So this is a place for a discussion. Is this okay that the dean of studies would say your data has to be put? Or you want to be very independent as a researcher and say, I want to always have control on the research data? But remember, research data. We're not talking about all data you have on your PC. So not everyone is going to clone the hard drive of your PC, but this links to what you define as a research data. So you see that there are several connections between different parts of the policy, and that's why it's so important to discuss each definition that you have in the policy. And for the rest of the session, I would like you to take a look at the policy, work in I think we can have 3 groups here, and work in 3 groups and try to look at 3 questions. The first question would be, what is who are the researchers? So if you look at the annex of definitions, we have 3 definitions: research, researchers, research data. Who are the researchers? In your case at the university, how do you define a researcher? Is it somebody with a fixed contract? Is it a postdoc? Is it a PhD student? Is it a master's student, bachelor level student? Because if you say that you want to keep data from everyone, it's also very expensive. So please discuss in groups, how do you think would work best? Who should be the researcher? How would you define this definition? And the second question from my side is, please take a look at the point 5.5, responsibilities of researchers and responsibilities of institution. So based on how you defined researchers, would it make sense to give such responsibilities to researchers? Can you expect from researchers these points? And always feel free to remove the points from the policy, to add points to the policy. So this will be the task for the next half an hour, and then we will make a short round of 15 minutes for reporting what each group found out and what you believe would work best for the PTUK. have their own conclusions that maybe it's better to start with the definitions of research and research data. So how do you believe what will be the best definition of researchers for this policy? Who would you count as researchers? Who should be within the scope of the policy? Should it be only people who are employed? Should it be also students, master students? Do you want to consider administration as researchers? You know, so what was your definition of a researcher? Here I have.
I think it should be academic staff and master student because there is no
أستاذ هلو بدي أحكي بس أنا صراحة حطيته على
So I said I think it should be academic staff and master students because we don't have PhD students here. That should be enough for this, I think. Just,
How many master students you have every year?
I think 50,
50,
I
okay.
guess.
Because this links up to the responsibility section that you were discussing. Because in the responsibilities we say that the researchers are supposed to back up the data and keep it safe, and the institution is supposed to provide the infrastructure. So this is about adjusting the numbers, whether the responsibility of the institution can match up with expectations that we set to the researchers. So what's your group thinking about it? What's your definition and whether this makes sense to you as well? Or
Yeah, in fact, sorry, thank you. Or Dr. Adnan want to add something? دكتور تحب تحكي عن الموضوع؟ In fact, we looked at the definition of research and researcher, and for research we were discussing whether we should add the research can be for validating already available results or disvalidating. That might be also a research. There are results about something, and a researcher works on validating these results or disvalidating them. So we thought that should be added here in the definition. A research can be also validating or disvalidating previously found results from other research.
I think for those of you who weren't at the conference the other day, we had a really nice talk from somebody from the University of Bethlehem, and he's got research students working with him. I think they're undergrads.
Yeah, they are
right.
school.
Discuss this issue really in our group.
Oh, right.
Maybe,
But the,
maybe I talk. Maybe the backwards students doesn't name as a researcher. So we cannot put their graduation projects in the system. They
Right.
are students.
yeah.
After graduation, they may be named as master researcher or PhD researcher. So researcher just focus on the postgraduate students.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's up to the institution to decide what is the right level of cutoff. But your institution, I think they had a really interesting example of the fact that they're getting something like 2 academic papers out into peer-reviewed journals every month, and it was purely by looking at data that's already out there. So going to the databases, doing some analysis on findings that were already there, putting them together and coming up with new research. So I
Yes,
think
yes,
it was
yes.
a nice example of your definition, that it's not just generating and collecting data, it's reusing data that's out there and making sure your own can be validated. So it's good.
Can I just ask maybe a question? Because sometimes when you want to define researcher, there may be a confusion whether this designation relates to producing like novel elements of knowledge, or is it a job title? Because many of us maybe talking about it as a job title. So a student cannot be a researcher, a master student, well, maybe not, maybe at the final stages. So please, can you just enlighten us as whether in this context a researcher refers, for example, in some American universities, you have faculty members and you have research professors. Okay, so that's, all of them are doing research, but some people are doing only research while others doing a mix. So should we consider this as a role that one plays or a job that one performs? I think that will
Yeah,
help.
I think that's a really excellent point, and I think it comes back to your point as well, as the levels that you're willing to do. Is very good to specify this policy applies to only people at this level, so masters and postgraduate and researchers and above. So that's one way to kind of specify who it applies to. It came up in our discussion as well. We sometimes have administrators who are doing research, and they don't technically fall under the role of researcher. But what they're doing is perhaps externally funded research, and they are producing research results. So it might be worth kind of coming up with a definition of what you think research is. So it's the activity in that case, rather than the title of the person. So if there is internationally relevant research or findings that you think should be captured, then it really doesn't matter if it's...
But
But I think, if you're looking for a policy to apply, it sometimes is easier to have this applies to X, Y, and Z. You could have a caveat that says, underneath, we would expect anybody who undertakes research on behalf of this institution to adhere to this policy. A good thing to do to check, if you're not entirely sure how to word it, is to go back to some of the policies you already have. So we have something called the Code of Good Research Practice in our institution. You probably have something similar that just, it's one of the contracts you never read when you start your employment and you get all the paperwork from your organization. There's probably a link in your contract to a policy that tells you how to govern yourself as a researcher. And in that, it will say something like anybody who undertakes research on behalf of this institution would be expected to comply with this policy. So that can be a nice way to get around having to specify it only applies to certain roles. It's then based on the activity. So look at what's already been done in your institution, because somebody else has probably spent weeks and weeks working on the right wording to get this done. So you could probably just reuse it.
I just wanted to add something, because that was exactly the aim of this exercise and the document, that it is self-containing, and because the definition of a researcher is so core to this document, that's why it was defined explicitly in the annex what is the definition that should be followed. That's why we combine here the definition we understand as the university. So you have to reach a consensus within your university that this phrasing is what you mean as a researcher. So if you think that this is a role, not the position, then it has to be defined like this. I see it sometimes like programming, when you define variables, and this is one of the variables you have to define. Very often you give the same names to the variables, but they have different meanings in different contexts. And this is a variable that you use throughout the whole document, and that's why these basic definitions, maybe some others. Maybe, for example, archiving should be also defined, what is meant by archiving. Is it also digital preservation or simply keeping it in a repository? There may be something about, I don't know, what is an external funder or something like this. So every time you work on a policy, you can add some definitions that explain what your university understands by this statement.
Okay, what about centralization? What about centralization? In our argue here, some people suggest that these terms should be locally, not based on the institution, but maybe on the government or the Ministry of Higher Education should define these terms, and this definition have to be implemented by all institutions. Is there any such practice in Europe? If we go to some Scotland universities and in Austria universities, is it the same definition that researcher is there and there?
So I can.
In the UK, no, it's not. Again, it comes down very much to the institution. What we do have at the sort of national level is that most universities who are research active have signed up to this Code of Good Research Practice. It's a sort of a high-level good practice guide that has been adopted by most of the universities. And in that, there are some kind of high-level things that you won't plagiarize, you won't take somebody else's work without giving credit, some high-level things. And that kind of thing, if you don't have something like that already, could be worth kind of coming out of this project perhaps, thinking, are there a set of terms and conditions that we would associate with good research practice? So there could be a chance to implement the development of something like that if you don't have it. But that is the kind of high-level unifying thing. When it comes down to institutional policies and how we define the staff, no. It differs pretty much university to university. We're all called something, we have different salary scales and different, everything's different really depending on the institution.
Just let me add something to it. We are having this exercise in Austria, as I mentioned in the presentation, and we all start from the same template, but no, we are same but different. If we had it centrally, one policy, people would complain it doesn't fit. It has to fit to what people want to do, otherwise they won't follow. And this document is a result of consultation of what was out there of other policies. So the core of the text is some kind of a consensus, what most people agree with, and you can only adapt it if necessary. If all of you take it as it is, so if you take the definition of research and researcher as it is, then you will have the same definitions. But giving this flexibility is something that is recommended by the therein project and the analysis they did. There is in the toolkit there is also a document which describes what should be the core elements of the policy, and you can write from scratch everything what you want as well.
Yes, but sometimes it goes to the edge of maybe conflict between maybe the institution and the researcher. Now we have to go back to the policy and what is defined here, what is not defined here. So it should be very clear about the definitions. It's not only just what we know. If we agree here on something, this does not be compulsory to some other party. So this is maybe sometimes make a conflict. If you mean by researcher, you mean something, and me, the other party, maybe if we want to make what is called joint work or joint research, your definition of researcher is different than my definition. This may lead to some conflict.
But that's why you have the jurisdiction section in the policy document, saying which document is more important. And finally, if the PTUK is getting a policy, then it will only affect people who are affiliated with PTUK. If you would like to have a policy that affects both you and me, then we would have to call United Nations to have a policy for data management, which is not possible. So.
I'm looking at my own university's code of good research practice, and the wording that we have is the code of good practice in research is for all staff, including technical and other support staff, and persons of honorary positions, and students carrying out research and at or on behalf of the university. So that is like a very broad statement, and it can be applied to whatever level you want. It just means that you could apply that to staff, it could be students. It means that anybody who's doing what we would classify as research should be doing what we would consider good research practice. So I think that's a good way to get out of being too specific in the research data management policy, having something that just says good research is, and we have 4 high-level principles: being honest, having integrity, blah, blah, blah. It's a 10-page document. That's why nobody reads it. I think it's too long, but it is there. And I think I would be surprised if your institution doesn't have something similar. So it's always good, before you start writing these policies, just to have a quick look at some of the other research policies that govern what people do and see if there are things that you can just point to. Because since we have this in most UK institutions, some flavor of this sort of high-level generic document that people have adapted for their own use, what we would do in our research data management policy, and what we have done, is just to link to that. So we say, we expect you to follow that policy. And that way we kind of wash our hands of having to do anything too specific here, because it's already been defined somewhere else. So we're not contradicting anything. We're saying you have to read this policy and abide by it, but in addition to that, here are other things you have to do.
I think that the definition of a researcher is it's a kind of controversial definition. I don't think it's necessary to have a unified definition of researcher. Maybe it varies from one institution to another, but there is something in common. And whenever an institution says, okay, this is a researcher, and another institution says that Professor B is a researcher, so I consider that, I believe in that, and we go ahead and cooperate. There's no problem, I think, in that.
No, there's no problem. I think that's why it's good to have the broad level definition that we all know. If I'm doing research on behalf of the university, I'm expected to do something along these lines. The only thing about being specific in a policy, which is useful, is that you want the people who have to adhere to the policy to know who they are. And that's the only reason that being specific in an institutional context can be quite good. So in your context, you were saying master's level students and people of this thing. So you would want to use terminology that is familiar to the institution. And whether that's in the wording of the policy or, as Thomas was saying, in the kind of definitions, somewhere that you're linking to at the end, it's not the wording of the policy, but maybe there's an asterisk beside the word researcher, and you come to the definition, and that's where you say, by researcher, we mean this person, this person, this person. Because the thing is, you don't want somebody to look at a policy and think, this doesn't apply to me. So the same way we want it to be inclusive of anybody doing research, we don't want it to be the kind of thing that people look at and think, well, I don't need to look at this because I don't see my job title here. So it's a balancing act. It's trying to make sure that it's clear enough for people who have to know what to do, know that they are covered by it, but not so exclusive that you have to rewrite the policy anytime there's a job title change. You know? So it's a balancing act.
Yes.
There are room for... I would like to say the following. I'm not sure if it's politically correct, but in environments or in situations where the definition of the researcher entails obligations on part of the researcher, I think the more far-reaching, the better it is. For example, if I want people to abide by the ethics of research, I don't want to let the student off the hook because he's a student.
No, exactly.
So I think the more far-reaching the definition is, the better. It's quite different if you are talking about the definition of the researcher to give privileges or something like that. So if you are talking about the researcher being granted a sabbatical every 6 years, then that may be in need of much more consideration. And I think we are in the first set of issues. So the more far-reaching, I think, the better. That's an opinion.
Definitely, I think there's two aspects to that. I think in terms of good practice, everybody should be following that. So you don't want to let anybody off the hook, definitely. But I think it depends if you're looking at this repository as a privilege. So if you have limited space in the repository, it sort of is a privilege. So maybe you don't want students to think, I now have the right to put everything I have in here. So it really depends on the institution and where you want to put your priorities. And I know we keep coming back to this time and time again. So much of it depends on your own context and what your own institution really wants to offer and what it wants to get back. So it always feels like we're telling you, you have to think about it from what you want, but I think it really is true that you have to decide, is this a burden, sort of a policy burden that you're demanding people do something, or is it a privilege that they get someone to put their information to make it visible and to get the citations and all the rest. So it's a bit of a play on words and how you want to describe the service.
But let me go back to the example of programming. The variables have their scope. So you have a variable for one program, the variable doesn't affect the other program. So you can reuse, you have different namespaces basically. So the same is here. We are defining who a researcher is for the sake of the research data management policy, to define who has the obligation. It doesn't affect any other document at the university. Somewhere else you can define that researcher is everyone who is enrolled in the study program. Somewhere else, when it's about sabbatical, you will say researchers are only professors. So we have to keep in mind there is a scope. There is a scope only for what to do with the research data. It's not about ethics. It's not about, I don't know, IPR, to be honest. It's not about anything else. It's just about what to do with data, who has to keep the data, and who has to archive the data, and so on. Now we're going to talk about data management plans. I have a presentation to introduce why we need them, what they are, and then Joy has some exercise in which we will get familiar with how to fill them up, because a plan, as I can say, is already a document outlining how you handle your research data. So this presentation has basically three parts. The first one, I think very important, is the motivation. Why we need them, why I'm here standing in front of you to talk about it. Then more on the details, what it is, what you can expect inside, how other countries are dealing with it, and then how to create one, what are the tools, what are the means of creating one. So I start the same way as we did it like 2 days ago. So we have the e-science, which is a new paradigm of science. People work in research infrastructures, we create data, we make discoveries based on data. We have examples like DNA sequencing or climate change analysis. So if we didn't have the computers that collected the data, if we didn't have the tools, we wouldn't be able to rebuild the whole DNA structure. Because if we were putting everything on paper, this would be a very big pile of documents, you wouldn't be able to see anything. Another good example I have here is from the Earth observation. This is the raw file that we get from the Sentinel satellites that are going around Europe, and they are taking pictures of Earth. And based on these pictures, we can get such models. This is an animation showing the glacier in Spitsbergen and how the size of the glacier changes. So this is like to prove whether the glaciers are becoming bigger or smaller. So what we do is we create a visualization, create an image, and then we calculate the amount of pixels that are black or white. And based on the amount of pixels, you can say that the glacier is becoming bigger or smaller. So without the tools that captured the information, that transformed it, visualized it, we wouldn't make any discoveries about glaciers in Spitsbergen. And that's the reason why we talk about data science and reproducibility. Reproducibility is being able to get the same result twice. This is a cornerstone of scientific research, of scientific method. So the idea is if I'm doing an experiment and Niall is doing an experiment, the same experiment, we get the same result. Because if we have a scientific theory, we must be able to validate it and prove that this is the same thing and not just a coincidence.
We use the same cheese.
Exactly. If I'm using a different cheese to do kanafa, then I'm getting something different. And this is about documenting the context. So if I have washed my hands or not, because maybe washing hands changes the taste of it. So to capture these things, when we had in the Newton times, when we were throwing a stone on the pavement, it was very easy because we were calculating the time, stone more or less the same science done. But documenting the whole software stack, all the programs we use, all the data, this is becoming challenging, and this is why we are talking about data management, and that's why we have the Romor project. This is a nice survey showing the problems we have in reproducibility in the computer domain. So researchers analyzed 600 papers from 8 ACM conferences. ACM conferences are usually the best conferences in computer science, or at least one of the most expensive to get a paper there, and they looked at the papers and they checked if the paper is promising any kind of software inside. And out of these 600 papers, 500 promised a software, that the researchers developed some software during the course of the project and the software does something. And they tried downloading the code and running the software, not checking whether what's in the paper really matches what the program produces, but simply being able to execute the software. And they had problems because they couldn't find the link for the software. Either the software they downloaded couldn't be executed. So out of these 500 papers, they found 85 references in an article to the code. They found some more information on the web, of the web page of the authors, or they got information from the authors by email, how to run the code. And they managed to run 120 programs out of 500. The 100 of the papers of the code they downloaded failed. They couldn't execute the program. But out of 500, they also didn't manage to build 179 because they didn't find any mentioning of the code, or the authors didn't want to share their code. So very low reproducibility in computer science. We have also examples in medicine, in economics, and so on. But I'm showing this because I know that you have background in computer science. The email replies that the authors of this survey got from the researchers who were asked to share the code were like, yeah, you cannot run the program because it's a wrong version, and they are now improving the code. They will make it available soon. Very often it was a PhD student who left and the code is not anymore available, or they were trying to use the things related to intellectual property rights and copyrights, that they cannot share the code because it's somehow protected under the patent. But these were the excuses. And because we know that there's a problem with reproducibility, the community in data management, digital curation, however you called it, decided to come up with some solutions. So some of them were open access to publications, so requiring people to put everything online when they publish a paper. You should also share the code. If you want to make people share the code, you have to provide the data repositories. So this is again a link to the Romor project. Data citation for data, not only for papers, because what we were doing at the conferences, we were citing the papers. But what was interesting for us for the e-science is the data that the people produced during the research. So providing a means to cite the data, not the paper. And the last thing, the main topic of today's meeting are the data management plans, documents in which scientists describe what they did in the research, what kind of data they collected, how they are handling them, and when the data can be available. So what is a data management plan? This is a very short definition from the University of Virginia. So DMP is a formal document. It's usually a written document or kind of a questionnaire. It outlines what you will do with your data during your research and after the research. So usually you write a data management plan before you start. You say that I'm going to keep my data in Dropbox, and once it's done, I'm going to put it into a repository at the PTUK University, let's say. I'm not saying if it's a good way to do it or a bad way, but you describe what you're going to do. And it's to ensure that the data will be safe now and in the future. So you don't lose your USB stick during your research, and you will not keep only one copy of your Sentinel images, but you will use proper infrastructure to maintain the data. And once the project finishes, you don't delete them because you don't have space on your hard drive, but somebody will take care of it, and it's written who will take care of it. DMP also makes you think. So if you are having a research proposal, people write very generic statements in research proposals that we will make breakthrough, cutting edge research, blah, blah, blah. But DMP makes you say, I'm going to use data from, and then you have to write from where. Is it available at some repository in some other country, or you will be collecting it directly by making observations? So you have to provide this explanation. It can also reveal how solid your research methodology is, because it's like with the fishing expedition. If you go fishing, you can just take your equipment, go to the river, at the river, sit, try to catch a fish. You don't get anything. But if you know what kind of a fish you're trying to catch, you know what is the correct time of a day to go fishing, you know what kind of bait you have to take so that the more fish come. So if you are really well prepared to catch the fish, the same is with the data. If you know what data you want to collect and what data you want to produce, it means you really understand what will be your experiment about. And this is a very, very nice side effect of a DMP. DMPs are popular around the world. So it all started basically in the US with the National Science Foundation, when they wanted from people 2 pages document to describe, outline the data management practices. It had no impact on the evaluation of a proposal. So when you were applying to get the funding, you had to write the DMP, but even if the DMP was badly written, they were still giving you the funding. But it has changed, I think, a year ago. And if you write a bad DMP, they can tell you, no, you have no idea how to handle data. We won't give you money because this is a public investment and you will waste taxpayers' money. European Union had pilot action, and now it's also obligatory that every project in Horizon 2020 must have a data management plan. Of course, there are opt-out possibilities that say if you have sensitive data, you're not allowed to share the data, then you can say this is one of the reasons you are not doing that. Of course, you can still write a data management plan and say I'm having sensitive data, so I don't share it, but it is a requirement. Other interesting cases is the South Africa. I think Joy will mention the South Africa today a few times. They didn't have any infrastructure 2 or 3 years ago, and suddenly they realized they need infrastructure for data management. They did many developments with repositories, and also data management plans became a very important building brick of the whole system that they are using. Australia doesn't have data management plans as a requirement, but have policies at the universities that make people think about data management. So it's not a legal requirement, but in fact is. And an example from the Gulf, Qatar also has a data management plan. They have many universities that are affiliated with well-known universities in the US or in the Europe, and this is why they also came up with data management plans as an obligatory thing. Here I wanted to give you an example about the Horizon 2020, but I said most of the things. So in the European Union, we have for the project in Horizon 2020, we get a template to fill out, so like a document, and you can see that there are different components of a file of this template. There are 6 sections and 31 questions, and you have to go through the list and answer them. In your document, you have a checklist from the DCC, which is basically the same thing as we have here. I'm not going into the details, but just to let you know, you are answering question, filling out a template, answering question, done. It's not that easy, but sounds easy. The life cycle of a DMP is that it is important that when you write a DMP at the beginning of the project, you have just an idea of what you're going to do. When you run the project, you update it. So for example, if there is a review in the project or something changes, you are deciding to use a new data set, you're changing slightly your methodology, then you should update the data management plan. It should always describe the latest version of how you're going to handle data, where you keep the data. And when the project ends, then you provide the final version. How to create one? So as I said, by answering questions from a checklist, but there is software that helps you do that. So instead of doing it on a piece of paper with a pen, you just have web forms that guide you through different sections of a data management plan. It facilitates co-working, so several people can work on one DMP. Like we discussed yesterday, data management is not a responsibility of one person, not only of the researcher, but also other parties that can help in answering the questions, like repository operators or some research support offices. And there are basically two tools that people use around the world. DMP Online, which is from Great Britain. So this is Joy's institution is running it, and DMP tool, which is the tool used mainly in the US. Recently, these both tool providers collaborate in the same project. They have the same code base. So they, underneath it will be the same product, still different branding, but they united, they realized that there is no need to duplicate the efforts because the needs of the researchers, the way we structure down the DMPs is more or less the same around the world. So this is the checklist that you have in your documents. This is underlying the tools. And here is an example of the DMP Online tool that Joy will use for the exercise with you. So if you go to this website, DMP Online DCCA's UK, you will find the login web page where you can create a new plan. And you have to select your project title. Then you have to provide whether you're from which organization you come from. Some organizations provide some tailored guidance, so help you how to answer the questions. But if your institution is not there, there's no problem. You always get default guidance from DCC. And if you are creating a DMP plan, the data management plan, there is always a way to select a funder, because some funders have specific requirements. They ask more questions or less questions. So you can use a template, but there is also a generic template provided by the DCC. Once you get through this, then you can see that your data management plan was created. It's called FFG Webinar Horizon 2020. And you have 6 questions. So one section is data summary, fair data, allocation of resources, data security, ethical aspects, and other. And in each of the sections, you have some questions to answer. You click on it, expand it, and provide answers. One of the examples here is that in the fair data, we have to describe how we will make your data findable, including provisions for metadata. So how people will get to know where your data is. And you provide an answer in the text box. And here on the right-hand side, you're getting a guidance which tells you actually what it means, fair data, what you should actually write in this box. And once you're done, you can export the document from the tool to the PDF. So it doesn't stay only within the system, but you can have a PDF, doc, XML. You can also select how it should be formatted. And once you created such a document, you can send it to the funder. You can share it with others. You can, of course, copy-paste the thing into Word and edit the way you want. But there is an export at the end. And that's basically all of it from my side. If you got an impression that this is another paperwork, another thing that people have to write, yes, somehow it is true that you have to do more reporting. But on the other hand, it's an awareness tool. It makes you think about your research. It makes you prepare better for research. It makes you think about your methodology. It also allows you to plan the project better. So clearing up any legal rights. If you're going to use data that you don't have any license to use, then you are not able to publish the results. So it allows you not to waste the funding you have. And if you need any more resources, you can find them here. So here is a nice handbook by UK Data Archive describing all the ideas around data management plans, persistent identifiers, repositories. So it could be used as a textbook for a course. Here is a DMP Online, and there are two papers describing DMPs and some webinars in which trainers explain how to write a DMP and what it is. And now we can move to the exercise part. So I hand over to Joy.
The rest of the time we have before the coffee break, what I wanted to do was to get you actually starting to use the tool. If a few people have laptops, I was hoping you could work in groups, just cluster around, and I'll run through how to start this, and then I'll set you off and you can start to play around with the tool. Just a couple of things to pick up on before I get to that. For those of you who weren't at the presentation in Ramallah, just to reiterate that this is a free open source tool. We provide it free at the point of use to anybody who wants to go in and register and start creating plans. So your researchers could go in and start using it now as it is. It's also available to customize for your institution, and we did talk about that at the Ramallah session, so I won't say too much about it here. But just to say that we are seeing the tool being used as a national level surface. So Canada, Denmark, France, Finland, Spain, quite a lot of people have taken the course, the source code, and customized it and are now using it to provide a sort of a national level service. And that certainly is something you can think about doing too. Thomas mentioned South Africa, and I think South Africa is a really nice example of a group that we might want to emulate, because just about 2.5 years ago, I went over to South Africa and we started to work with them to develop infrastructure. And in 2.5 years, they've really come a long way. They've got a lot of initiatives with their governments. A lot of institutions are doing a lot of good things. So I think that's one peer group that we might want to start to link up with. So I'm going to show you, let me see if I can go in. So DMP Online, if you go to DMP Online, the URL that Thomas mentioned, this is the basic page that you're going to come to. What you'll want to do, I'm assuming nobody has an account already. So what you'll want to do is click here to create an account. You're just going to put your email in here. Your organization probably, you can start typing in your organization. If it appears, that's great. If not, you can always add your organization manually. So that's fine. So that's the basic way that you're going to work in signing in. So,
Excuse me, John, what is the DMP Online?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, this is the one we presented yesterday. So if you go to https://dmponline.dcc.ac.uk, you should be able to get into it on your mobile phone. I think we've optimized it for mobile phones as well. So essentially anybody can go in. I'll just sign in as an example since I already have an account. So what I want you to do is to go in, log in, register for an account. Then I want you to create a plan. So you just click this one, and then you can put in a project title or not. It's up to you. You can play around with that. What I want you to do in terms of organization, I don't want you to use your own. I want you to use the Technical University of Cape Town. So if you start writing it in, it should come up. So it's the Cape Peninsula University of Technology, South Africa. So if you select that, click on it. Then if we go down to the next section, there's our...
Should we wait for people to do it, or...?
I can walk around. I'm just going to run through it, and then I'll walk around with you, and you can show it. What I want you to do is not select a funder, because what I heard from this morning is that quite a lot of institutions are funding their own research. There's not necessarily any funding requirements. So I want you to tick this box here that says no funding associated with this plan. And then the next step is just to say create a plan. And in that you can start to see we get a little bit more information to fill in. The very first session that we did in Ramallah, we were talking about identifiers and how useful they can be in terms of following outputs throughout the life cycle and making sure you capture all the research that is coming through your projects. So things like this here, we've been talking a lot about ORCID IDs, or persistent unique researcher identifiers. In addition to my name, you can also put in your ORCID ID or any other kind of ID that you have. And you can see here that it'll give you some guidance. In this one here, the ID, this is where you're going to get something that comes from your funding body. So if I'm writing an application and I know I've got a funding ID, I can put it in here. The grant number, this one tends to come from your university system. So if I've registered something in my university grants application system, I usually get a number, and that's where I might want to put that in here. So it just allows you to start to build that continuity between things. So I'm just going to save at this point. Once you've done that basic thing, you don't actually have to fill anything in here. Once you can come back and do this iteratively, so you don't have to do it all at once. In terms of guidance, Thomas mentioned that you can get multiple levels of guidance provided with the tool. The default that you can get is the Digital Curation Center. So as we developed the tool, we wrote specific guidance that was generic and just applied to good practice in terms of research data management for all of the questions. Because I've logged in as myself, and I'm a researcher at the University of Glasgow, I also get the option to have my own institution. So my institution has developed customized guidance within the tool, so I can tick this box, and I'm going to get all the information that relates to my institution when I'm answering questions rather than the generic high-level guidance. So it'll tell me, instead of just put your data in a repository, it will tell me put it in our repository and give me the link. So it just makes things a little bit more clear. I'm not going to use that for this exercise, so what I want you to do is to tick the Digital Curation Center guidance and then just press save, and then you will get,
That's easy.
yeah. Then you get your your information here. This is the summary of what you'll have to answer in this particular template, and you can see the sections and the questions. So it gives you that nice kind of ability to see at a glance how much you have to do, and then you just start answering the questions. And this is the screenshot that Tamas gave us. Again, just click on any answer here. You can see here that because I am using the Technical University of Cape Town, I'm going to get their guidance. So any question that I have here, this one is, what data will you create and how? That was one of the questions. And you can see here, they've given me some very specific information to help me write that out. So, you know, what is the data? Where is its origin from? As Thomas was saying, for reproducibility, any tools and software that I need to use to do that creation or to analyze the data. If I'm using secondary data, where did it come from and what kind of restrictions or licenses might be applied with it? So a set of questions here. We also have some DCC-specific guidance. So instead of any researcher coming to the tool, and as Thomas mentioned, all of the funders have templates. It's a list of questions that they want you to ask, but it's blank boxes. And I think researchers don't like blank boxes. They want, tell me what to write. So this is really what the tool offers, rather than just making it an online version of it. It gives you that guidance. So you can start writing in your answers and using the guidance, and then you just save as you go through, and you can start to go through each of the questions. You can start and stop. You don't have to write it all at once. You can come back and do it collaboratively. I mentioned before that, I think Thomas mentioned it again, it's a collaborative tool. So I can start a plan, and I can choose to share it with you. I can share it with you. You know, I can share it with any number of people. There's no limit on the number of people you can share it with. In practical terms, you don't want to share it with that many people. You want to keep it manageable and know who's writing and what they're doing. But it tells you that I'm the last person who did anything with this question. So you get a little bit of intelligence with the tool as well. What CPUT has done as well is give you a little bit of an example of what to put here. So how much space is required to store the data, including backups. They're giving you here, so give it to me in gigabytes or terabytes or whatever. So they're giving you a bit of guidance. So that's just the basic way that the tool works. I'm going to go to the share. So as you work through the questions and you decide, I can answer the first 3 questions, but I think I need to go to my colleagues in the library to help me think about documentation standards or metadata. So I'm going to invite somebody from the library team to help me to fill this out. What you can do is then simply add their email and tell them what level of permission that they have. So they can either be a co-owner of the plan. If you're a co-owner, you've got all the rights that I have as the owner of the plan. You can come in, you can edit, you can delete, you can do whatever you want. You're basically at that level of permission. If I want that, that's fine. I might just want somebody to come in and kind of say, does this look right? Correct anything I've done wrong. So they might just get editor skills, editor permissions. And in that one, you would just, I probably shouldn't keep going with this. You would get editor. The last version here, and this is maybe something that you want to do maybe as a final step, just before you submit the plan, is maybe just have somebody with read-only access. So if there's somebody that you want to have kind of take a final look and just check and make sure everything's right, but you don't want them to start to change anything, they only get read-only access. So you can decide how many people you want to invite and what level of permission you want them to have. So that's enough to get you started. So I'll walk around if people want to. There's a computer up here for anybody who maybe wants to use this one. There's somebody over there with a laptop. And does anybody else have a laptop that they would be willing to work on? So we've got three machines. So I think if we can have people clustering around the 3 machines and just working through, that would be good. What I want you to do when you're working through this is to kind of think of it both in terms of being a researcher. So if you are expecting researchers to fill out a data management plan, think about, does this look daunting to you? Does this question make sense? What would you think of if you were asked to do this and coming to it? Because most of you are researchers and you may well have to do this. But also in terms of this particular project, think about it in terms of being a service provider. So is there any particular guidance you want them to know? And if you do, obviously we will, in some time, if there is a question that says, where will you put your data? We know that we want them to put it into the repositories that we're building. So start to think where the guidance might come up. So that's basically it for this session. We have about 45 minutes, I think, for people to play around with it. So I'll come around and see how you're getting on, but maybe decide who you want to work around. And again, there is a machine up here for those who want to work around a desktop. So have a play around with it, and I'll see how you're getting on.